You're listening to another episode of From the Dust with Sarah Decker, a place to explore spiritual experiences and topics. And no, we are never alone. Well, Phil reached out to me on a near-death experience group that we're both a part of and was willing to have this conversation today, and I am looking forward to that. Phil Golding is who we're having here today. He is a transpersonal psychotherapist teaching meditation, mindfulness, and self-awareness, and hosts his own podcast on YouTube. Is it on any other platforms?
It's on the major audio platforms as well.
Okay. I did know you have a website that is innerharmony.com.au.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. And
of course, I got a book, I suppose. I better grab that and wave it about as well.
Sure. Well, please do.
Yeah, so that's 5 Steps to Freedom. Many of the podcasts are based on that, and it's a 5-step process, therapeutic self-awareness process to help you heal your mind and master your mind, basically from a very grounded perspective, but helping you understand and be able to access your consciousness and your potential on that perspective, and then learn how to look after your own mind and your own humanness. So how to have a relationship with yourself, really, that is loving.
Really interesting. That sounds really interesting.
Parent. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you get that on Amazon.
Yeah, and that is on your website where it can be accessed.
Okay. Yes.
Perfect.
And you can get it through Amazon, online on Amazon as well.
Okay. Perfect. Well, so everyone, you can go look him up on Amazon, on his website, get his book, see what else is going on over there. I did look at your website as well, and there's a bunch of different steps to look at over there. So
yeah,
please do. So today we're going to talk about. I really enjoy hearing about people's path to awakening. I think it brings things to takes people off a pedestal that we tend to put people on, and helps us to realize it's possible for us as well. And so we're going to be talking about your path to awakening and healing and awareness as well today, and how you use that as a vehicle to explore this spiritual path, what that really means, and use it to help others. So looking forward to it.
Sounds great.
Okay, well, Phil, I was wondering, first off, when you were growing up, was your home a very spiritual home? Were you connected to any of this kind of thing?
It was moderately religious, I suppose. My mum and dad went to church, but they weren't preachy. They didn't push it. When I was around 14, I got a bit born again and excited about that. My eldest brother had a friend who became a Christian, much to my eldest brother's displeasure. And but he became a very nice mentor for me for a while. And and I had natural spiritual inclinations I didn't know what to do with. But, and I joined a nice, just little spiritual group, and that was good. I liked that. It couldn't hold me. I didn't know really what to do with it. I'm more on the wisdom path, and it's hard to really get the in-depth wisdom approach in Christianity, I've found. And so I faded away from that, but I reconnected later on through a different kind of path. Yeah.
And you were telling me in our previous conversation that you had, you were connected to previous lives, I think is what you were telling me. Is that you were having memory or stress that was connected to previous lives? And tell us about that.
That's the I guess the most significant spiritual phenomena that has influenced my life and had much more profound influence than I realized at a young age. I didn't know about those things, and I didn't understand how it was influencing me. It was ultimately the reason why I was suffering chronic depression as a young man and older teenager. I was very open to, if you look at my soul astrology chart, as emotionally open to, past life, and so and so I brought in two levels. I brought in the knowledge, which I connected to later, but I also brought in a lot of unfinished business, I guess, to test myself on, which I realized later as well. But that was, they were lives that went pear-shaped. I didn't have the maturity to pull out of that. And so I passed away in that negative state of mind. And so they were the lives that really were unconsciously influencing me. And as I got older, would influence me more. And so I would have, as a late teenager, I'd have a tendency to be quite melancholic in my outlook. I would fall into learned helplessness quite easily, and which then started to turn into depression. But very early on, looking back, there were subtle things going on. I would have nightmares that were a bit odd. Like I remember as a kid seeing the first episode of Gilligan's Island, which kind of indicates how old I am. And it gave me nightmares. Watching, really early series of Robin Hood, that gave me nightmares. I was in the dungeon with the executioners coming down to get me and that was kids' dreams. There was no sort of reason why I'd be having those kind of nightmares, and I would just think a bit oddly and very daydreamy. So I'd think a bit different.
Okay, so I'm curious how you went from not being aware of past lives at all, or that we even lived more than once, to then finding this out and realizing that it was a key to your healing.
Yeah, well, that's well, it all started around the age of 24. I started prior to that. Because I was, by the time I got to my last couple of years in high school, I was really breaking down. I felt like the world was in a bubble and I was on the outside. I felt so disconnected, and I didn't know I was breaking down. My parents really weren't that emotionally aware. They were good people, but they, just didn't have the awareness. And my character type was quite different to them, and so they didn't really understand. I'm a sort of a deeper intuitive thinker, and so I ended up dropping out of my last year in high school, and just sunk into quite a chronic depression. And but trying to function still. I went to Sydney, major city. I grew up in a country city, to become a biological technician, which I'm not a biological technician, but my first job was in a pathology lab. And a friend's father got me a job in because I dropped out of school and was looking for something to do. And but then I dropped out of that at the end of the year because I couldn't do things that wasn't inspired in the heart. And come back to my hometown. My parents had retired and moved to the coast by that time, but renting the house, and I was hanging out in the caravan. The renters were friends of theirs, and they allowed me to stay in the caravan in the backyard. And that was probably my lowest point. I was quite suicidally depressed then. I didn't make any attempts. If I did, I would have succeeded because I'm pretty handy. But I would sleep most of the day and watch TV. That was my thing. And I'd come alive on the weekend because I wasn't unemployed, and I could pretend to be normal like everybody else. But what pulled me out of that just quickly was a motorbike accident. I would be riding my trail bike on the weekends with my mate, and ended up having a head-on with a car, crushed my right foot, and so I was recovering from that for a year, waiting for a minor operation, and so that really probably saved my life. And in one sense, it pulled me out of that, and I went to stay with my parents' place on the coast, and so that got me moving. I ended up in Brisbane, following a custom painting course that I did, which I was good at, and so I went to Brisbane to work for them. And that really is what put me into a new environment. And I met a lass who was a chronic alcoholic, which I didn't really know much about, and I was very naive, and I was busy trying to save her, but we ended up getting married, but she inevitably became sober in AA. And whilst I was busy trying to, run her life and control her life, I wasn't really, didn't have to pay too much attention to mine. And so once she got sober in AA, all my depression and things were just waiting for me. And so I had to really start looking at that. I saw that she was getting on with her program, and when I took her to an open AA meeting, because she didn't have a driver's license at the time, AA meeting, the moment I saw the 12-step banner on the wall, something just went click in my head. My first real experience of an intuitive knowing. And I just knew it was a path to transform yourself. And I had no knowledge. This was one of my challenges, I suppose. My parents weren't thinkers. They weren't self-investigators. There was no preparation for me to be looking at myself, to think philosophically about anything. There was nothing in my background, my family of origin background, to prepare me for that. And yet, the moment I saw that banner on the wall, I instantly knew what it was for. So that was a little bit of an interesting thing. It took me a few months to find my own 12-step program, but I did that and began my journey. That's how I started it, really.
Okay. And then, so that's admirable in and of itself, to go through something like that and to be willing to take the step that you needed to find your own program, as you said, and to go through that for yourself. And so,
yeah, well, it's a typical entrance into the path, isn't it? Suffering. And I've found that it's either intuition, you just simply know, and that's driving you, or suffering is going to drive you. And so it was a bit of both for me. And so that intuition gave me a bit of an extra kick in being able to understand what the program was trying to achieve and trying to help me to do. And I was able to use it to turn around and face myself with acceptance. And so I was able to start to really get into my depression rather than trying to get away from it. I was very untrusting prior to that, typical thinker, didn't trust anybody. And so I didn't seek counseling. I didn't, try to go down that avenue. I thought I could do it all myself. And in a way I could, because of that intuition, but I needed obviously a process to access, and the 12-step program was good enough for that. And so I started, the self-acceptance enabled me to face myself, and I was able to start to open my heart to myself and begin to have a relationship with my own mind, really paying attention to, I was learning mindfulness without even knowing it, really. And I started to really pay attention to what was going on inside me. And I realized I was just judging myself all the time. I had big dreams, and I think this was also a part of the past life thing. And there was lots of potential there that was in my unconscious, and I wanted to do all these big things in the world, and but had no idea how to do it. And so I would then just implode because I would then judge myself because I thought I'd failed. The bus had left me at 20 years old. The bus had left and gone without me, you know. And so I was very ungrounded and really had no idea how to drive this thing called Phil Golding. But getting
I think a lot of
started,
people can identify with that.
yeah, but you know, but there was like that learned helplessness, but yet thinking that I should be doing big things in a way. And so that, in a sense, worked against itself because then I'll be judging myself because I wasn't achieving anything. I didn't know how to. But the 12-step program gave me a start. I was able to start to really face myself and start to accept myself and begin to understand how my mind was defeating itself. And that started to open my heart and begin to work through those layers of trauma that I really didn't fully understand where they came from. I mean, yeah, I had some bullying. I had an older brother who bullied me quite a bit. And I got a lot of bullying at school, but there was nothing really that explained the depth of depression that I was experiencing.
I know I've talked to others and had this experience myself where you look at the list of maybe tells, I don't know what to call them off the top of my head, but where you know that if you're displaying this type of behavior, it can often mean that you've gone through this certain type of trauma. And sometimes you're told to watch out for these things if you have abuse in your family or something, and you kind of like watch for it in your kids so that you can get them what they need and whatever. And I know I've talked to people that have these kinds of tells or traits or things that are happening in their life that they have no reason for because their life has not had that abuse.
Yeah.
And so is that what you're kind of saying, is that you were having these experiences in this deep turmoil without really experiences that made sense to you
that's right. It didn't really, that didn't really occur to me so much then. I was just busy trying to work through that stuff and overcome it, which I was inevitably able to do. You know, some years later, I was able to have some time off, and I just got all the tools and journaling and opening my heart and really delving into all my relationships with my parents and everything, but really just reflecting back into how that my conditioning, and that's all I could look at is just my family of origin. But that was enough to reflect on how I was treating myself, and I just got to a deep enough level of unconditional self-acceptance where the program just fell to bits. Like that negative conditioning part, the foundation of that just dissolved, and the depression never came back. You know, my clarity around unconditionally accepting myself and owning my worth became deep enough to render that old conditioning void. But what it also did was it was opening my heart more and more. And as a therapist and as a spiritual seeker on the path of facing oneself and learning how to integrate your humanness, the more you open, it's like opening Pandora's box. The more you can open, the more stuff will then start to come to the surface because you're not pushing it down anymore. So interesting things, were getting ready to unfold. And so I was just in that kind of bubble, but also wanting to continue to grow. And And a friend of mine in the program was trying to talk to me about Buddhism and things like that, but I was still very skeptical, so I just dismissed that. But nevertheless, some books started to come my way, and I've just got a little bit of cramp in my legs, so I'm moving around, squirming around a bit. That's better. So some books started to come my way very synchronistically that started to step me up to a more esoteric spiritual contemplations. And then I was also aware by that stage, well aware that I had an aptitude for psychology. It was just a natural. And again, this is where my intuition was. The first psychology book I picked up was Existential Psychology, which they barely teach at university because you can only truly understand it by actually facing yourself and letting go of your ego. And so that eventually took me to university to study psychology. And within a couple of weeks, I went off to the I forget what it's called now, the spiritual person at the university who tends to people's spiritual needs. It's not the pastor, I forget what they call it at a university here in Australia. But anyway, he was holding a meditation group, and I went along to that. I walked out after the group with a stout middle-aged lady. They said, "Yeah, we felt a connection. Do you want to go up to the cafeteria and have a cup of coffee?" And yep, that's good. And the next minute, I knew she was talking about the works of Alice Bailey, which is neo-theosophy. If you've heard of Helena Blavatsky, in that theosophical tradition, well, Alice Bailey came after Blavatsky, working with the same master, channeling his stuff through writing. And she gave me a compilation copy of one of her books, and that was like just a key into a vault of knowledge that just blew my intuition wide open. And that was the real first experience of, I don't know what you would call it, like massive epiphanies, and started to have, I guess, experiences of a higher spiritual nature. I was so blown open, I couldn't even sleep. Yeah. That's
yeah. Because it sounds like your box was opened. Everything that you had knew and presumed.
Did. Yeah. I was just blown away, and so wide up I couldn't even sleep. I would literally experience. I would be meditating, following some of the teachings, and lying in bed. I would literally experience my body sleeping, but I was still quite awake. But I would go into dream states, which were very guiding kind of dreams. So I was very much on a higher vibrational state at this stage, just taking all of this in. I would read a page, but that page would just, put me into this contemplative state where all this knowledge would be coming through. I just so readily understood it. And if you've ever looked at an Alice Bailey book, it's 10-point type, it's no pictures. It's like, would give most people a headache just trying to read it. It's not easy stuff to get into. It's quite advanced, I suppose. But for me, it was like just coming home. And so that, again, was a wake-up call to what is going on here.
But I wrote it down, Alice Bailey.
Yeah, Alice A. Bailey.
And she's channeled and has.
Yeah, the thing with theosophy is it comes from a spiritual perspective, quite an intellectual spiritual perspective. And it is an integrative study and exploration of all paths, really. So it was a very efficient way to get abreast of whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, whatever it was.
Mhm.
I could
Well, I know
access
that
to those
um,
teachings.
one of that sounds really interesting. I know one of my goals with this channel is not to be stuck in the box of whatever label someone comes from, and be willing to receive knowledge and truth wherever it's at, wherever that happens to come
That's
your
right.
way,
Yeah.
and just being
Yeah.
able to be open to those things and whatever that truth is. And so that's really interesting. I know I tend to my mind works that way to whatever I'm reading. I'm picking up pieces from all these different parts of um, whether it's science or whether it's religion, whether it doesn't really matter. I'm pulling from all these different facets of things that I'm reading and studying and making a big picture.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's a beautiful thing to be able to do, and to realize that there's just so much more where we can learn so much more. There's no matter what category we may put ourselves in, whether a specific religion or a scientist or whatever. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to me that there's so many. A lot of people come to believing in near death experience. They start believing in a God or a creator or this higher presence because of the science they've done around near death experiences. And I
Yeah.
think that's a really interesting thing. And then, I know for myself, being in a very particular religion most of my life, it wasn't until I started um, in pondering things outside of my box of what I was familiar with
Yes.
that
Yes.
I started really having so many more questions so I started getting answers that clarified a lot of the questions I had from a lot of my life. And then as I continued to learn more, I'd get more questions, and it just started expanding to where now there's truth that I have from so many different places that are not just in that particular religion anymore. It doesn't fit in that box, but what it does fit into is the box of truth within my soul. And so it's been a beautiful journey, and that's what I hope um, for all those who watch, and who listen, that they can open up their own hearts and minds to the
Yeah.
possibility of truth outside of what someone outside of themselves has told them is acceptable. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Indeed. Absolutely. Yeah.
To pursue
It's
that truth wherever their spirit takes them, pursue truth in that
yeah.
way, that
That's
direction.
right. Yeah. And that was very much the path I was on. Learning to open my heart through accepting myself, and then learning to accept others, and learning to feel knowledge rather than. I guess I was always a skeptic. I didn't want people to tell me what was truth, and so that helped me to have an open mind. But also had to start to allow myself to listen and take things in. And those experiences really helped me to do that, to realize that, to trust my intuition, trust my feeling. And so, I was learning what felt right on that intuitive level, to search, but to not draw conclusions, and to follow that right feeling path.
One thing that I thought of earlier as you were talking about your journey is that sometimes we, as our spiritual selves that has more knowledge and more wisdom than what we kind of consciously have in these mortal bodies. And as you were talking about your journey, I almost saw it as yourself lifting your spiritual self up to your own stature, to the stature that you spiritually really are at, and
Yeah.
then being able to grow from there
Yeah.
together.
Well, that's the importance of acceptance. Like as a therapist and someone who is facilitating people's awakening, if you can face yourself and commit to a relationship with yourself of unconditional self acceptance, and we've really got to take that unconditionality seriously. It doesn't mean we know how to do it, but it is to commit to that. And that really plugs you into your ultimate potential, because unconditional acceptance is a quality of unconditional love. And I've since come to understand and experience that unconditional love is simply how we feel oneness. And oneness is all there is. It's life itself on a universal consciousness level. And it literally is where we're all plugged into that oneness. So if we're able to represent that unconditional acceptance to ourselves, where we're now placing ourselves in that observer position, we've initiated, awakened our ego into conscious awareness. Now above the mind, because we're just raised the frequency, because I'm now representing unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional love to myself as best I can. I'm on a learning path of doing that. But that then enables me to see everything that is the opposite to that in my mind, which is everything that is causing me to suffer. So it puts me on a journey of becoming my own mentor and representative of universal love. And so that is naturally going to, if we persist, the importance is to never give up and have faith in that process. If we persist, we're just going to continue to work through whatever we have to work through layer by layer, and open also to our potential layer by layer. And so just
Well, I was thinking, well, I just wanted to share this because
yes,
I said earlier to bring ourselves up to our own stature, and I don't want people to feel like where they're at is less than. What I was thinking when I saw that was that as we unconditionally accept ourselves, we're able to drop the lies. And that's what I mean. It's like those things that weigh us down, because they really weigh us down, those things we believe about ourselves. And if we can shed those, be free of those things, then we are lighter, and we're able to then function more freely. And I think that's a beautiful step. I think sometimes, I know for me, I thought of life as this hardship, right? You were talking about these hard things that kind of push us into growth. And life often has these hard things. And I remember a couple years ago being really concerned about the continued hard things. I was like, I don't know if I can handle anymore right now. I don't know if I want that, I don't want, I was particularly thinking about marriage. I had just recently gone through a divorce, and I was thinking, I don't know if I want that again. That was really hard, and I share this because I think I'm obviously not the only person who's ever experienced this. And so at that time, the answer I kind of received after pondering this for a long time and being very concerned about it, was told that, well, what if the growth that you receive in the next relationship is just that of understanding that you deserve love, that you deserve to be accepted and to have joy and to receive and to be loved. And that's a different kind of learning. It's a different kind of learning than I ever really had considered before in my life, because I thought, well, learning is like all that's wrong with me, right? Like I need to go learn all the things I've done wrong so I can be different. And it was like, well, what about the learning that is realizing that you are loved and lovable and wonderful just the way you are and deserving? What about that kind of learning? And that's the kind of learning that I feel that you're talking about.
Yes. In setting that commitment to accept ourselves unconditionally, you are learning how to realize your true nature, your Christ consciousness from that perspective, you are learning how to realize yourself as love, not looking for love, but realizing that we're all plugged into that. Like I've learned to understand that in a relationship, we want to be standing on our own foundation and then give to the relationship, replenishing from our own foundation, so that's sustainable. You don't want to be in a relationship where you're like that, leaning on each other, thinking or expecting the other to be the source of love for you. Because it's like, I finally found my partner, I'm going to get all the love that I need, but my partner's looking at me thinking the same thing. Well, where are we actually getting it from then if I'm empty and she's empty? And so when we, in the beginning of a relationship where we are accepting each other unconditionally, there's that honeymoon period, which places us in this lovely sanctuary, which enables us to open our own heart. And we're actually downloading our own love, our own potential, not knowing that it's coming from our own, higher being. And so but because we think it's coming from the other person, we start putting expectations on the other person to keep delivering that love, and they don't live up to those expectations because they're human. And then the judgments start to come in, it all starts to close down. But in reality, I'm not aware that I'm actually only judging you because I'm first judging myself. And this is so deep in our human unconscious that we're judging ourselves all the time. We're thinking we've got to be measuring up to some arbitrary standard in order to be worthy. It's like every day we're asking life permission to exist, from all the various people out there we think have authority over us. So a very essential part of me overcoming my depression is realizing that there's only one thing we require to be worthy, and that is to exist. And you can't not exist. And so congratulations, you've already got your ticket just by being here. And you're worthy whether you're physically in a body or not. You can't not exist, and so you can't not be worthy. That's the bottom line. And we all intuitively, in some level, know that. But it gets so obscured by all the confusions of the mind because we're so vulnerable as a child. We need the world to protect us and validate us, and we don't know what we are. That's the challenge of being human, isn't it? But to get back to that understanding that I can take the position of being the absolute authority over my own worth, not in an egotistical way, but in a self-responsible way, where I'm giving myself love without having to take from anybody because I'm already plugged into it. That's a hard thing to feel at first, particularly with depression, because the unconscious thought structures are dominating the emotional nature. So I'm trying to work this process, accepting myself, but all the unconscious thoughts continually generate those negative emotions, and I just keep feeling defeated over and over again, and people give up. That's why you've got to have the faith that unconditional self-acceptance is plugging you into something that is limitless, whereas the mind is a limited construct, no matter whether it looks like Mount Everest at first when you try to face it. It's when you boil it down, there's only about probably half a dozen negative programs that are running that just keep going around on a loop. And they will only keep running so long as you're reinforcing them with your awareness in the moment. If you're believing with them, identifying with them, you know what I mean?
Thank you for being here. And don't forget to subscribe. God bless.